So we just got the patch notes that are going to be dropping on February 13th. So we're looking at next Tuesday if you're watching the video on the day that I put this out. And this includes the long-awaited change to how Uber Unique's crafting and kind of a no-drop protection system is being added into the game for people who are farming Duriel, are getting Uber Uniques, and sadly don't have the ones that they want. So to just very quickly talk about why they're doing it, I want to read the developers' notes because I think that their intent is very important here. Because what I'm going to argue is that their intent is not matching what the outcome of this is going to be, and I think I have some okay data to be able to back that up. Because luckily, the moment that we found out that this system was going into place, I asked my community a poll of how many Uber Uniques do they even have, and we got a pretty decent amount of votes here, 2,400 votes. I have some breakdowns about like who is in my viewer base, what are my assumptions about my viewer base, because obviously there's a bias here. It's not representative of the entirety of the spectrum of players playing the game. But let's start with the developer notes and hear what they think that this is going to accomplish. Uber Unique items are highly sought after. I agree. With the Season of Blood, they introduced target farming Uber Uniques with Uber Duriel to give players another source of acquiring this item. If you're unaware, Uber Uniques effectively don't drop in the regular game. While we have seen a smattering of reports on Reddit here and there, at this point, the only place you're really getting an Uber Unique is from Uber Duriel, and I have never personally found an Uber Unique outside of that. I got a couple thousand hours in the game at this point, over multiple seasons since they were introduced. And I don't have anybody in my community who can legitimately point me to like, hey, look at this Uber Unique I just dropped in a Nightmare Dungeon or something like that. However, we want to give players increased autonomy in obtaining their desired Uber Unique by addressing feedback that expressed how acquiring duplicate or undesirable, and that's a really important word there, and we're going to come back to it, Uber Unique items lessens that feeling of triumph. A new system empowers players to make a use of a duplicate or an undesired Uber Unique item by salvaging them for a new resource, which can then be used to eventually craft an Uber Unique. Additionally, the chances for Uber Uniques to drop everywhere that isn't Uber Duriel has been increased. I have another quick little sticky point about that, which I think is kind of interesting, but let's go ahead and look at the actual changes themselves. You can now salvage an Uber Unique to get a resplendent spark. Now, people are asking the question, how many do you get? I am near positive until something else comes out that says otherwise, that one Uber Unique is one spark, and you can take 5 of these and go craft an Uber Unique of your choice. Basically, you're going to do this at the Alchemist. They changed a couple things about that. It doesn't really matter. And then the next bullet point is really important, and how drastic of a change this is really changes overall, like how effective this patch is going to be. The drop chance of Uber Unique items acquired outside of Uber Duriel has been increased. Just to give you a rough idea, we think that Uber Duriel has roughly a 2% chance of dropping an Uber Unique. So if you were to do 50 Duriel runs, you would expect to drop one Uber Unique around 65-ish% of the time. Meaning that you could go multiple 50 sets of runs or even hundreds of runs without ever dropping an Uber Unique. A lot of people have, a lot of people report it, and a lot of people are frustrated about it. So when we're talking about a system that's looking to serve the people who are currently frustrated versus who is actually going to be served by this change, we need to start looking at some data. And sadly, Blizzard does not make any of its player-based data available to us. It doesn't make any of its drop rate data available to us. And it hasn't given us a number of total Uber Uniques that are in the ecosystem, whether you're talking about Eternal or the most recent season. So we got to pull data from somewhere. And that's why I went to my community. For my community, since this is something that's going into the Eternal realm as well as Season 3. So keep this in mind. This data set is actually even larger than it realistically would be season to season. But I asked the question between seasons 2 and 3, how many Uber Uniques have you dropped? With the options of 0, 1 to 3, 4 to 6, this is actually 7 to 9, and then 10 or more. And with 2,400 votes here, 139 comments with people generally detailing how many they have dropped of any one kind. Here, one Shaco, one Grandfather, 42 Duriel runs. This person actually super lucky on this particular count. But we got some examples of the average drop rate and the average experience of players. And if all we're thinking about is being able to take 5 Uber Uniques and turn them into the one that you want, that means that 56 plus 26, a whopping 82% of my population of viewership, which is kind of representative of the average. I actually want to show you my demographics just to give you an idea of like how powerful or how little bias there is in this data. But 82% of the player base literally cannot interact with this new system at all. They just don't get to. And maybe that's okay, right? An Uber Unique is Uber. It's supposed to be super rare and valuable. The average casual player, shouldn't get one. And I put it into air quotes there because we have this idea of like weird karmic justice that if I play a game for a lot, I should get more than you. And that's just like a whole can of worms that we're really not going to get into on a philosophical level, but not everybody is going to be mad at that. Let's go ahead and look at the data though. So to start off with, we have the demographics of my viewership, something that I thought just might be kind of interesting. We can't really pull out specific information here because each player is going to be different regardless of how old they are, but I have a subscriber count of 40,700. That's not a flex. Thank you so much to everybody who supports. I really, really appreciate it. But if we want to look at who's playing the game that watches my content, which predominantly is in the Diablo ARPG sphere, we have the majority of people being my age demographic, 25 to 34, the millennials. Then you have 35 to 44, the elder millennials getting up into Gen X. And then 45 to 54, with a much smaller percentage of my viewership being in the teen age of 18 to 24, and then a slightly smaller amount of my viewership being 65 plus. Now, what insights could you possibly pull out of this? I don't know. Maybe that people who are between 18 all the way up to 35 have more time to play the game. So they're the average person who is already participating in the Duriel grind. It's impossible to do that, but I figured that little chart right there would be nice in case anybody was wondering what the demographics were. But again, just looking at the number of Uber uniques that people have self-reported that they have dropped between these two seasons. The vast majority have between 0 and 3 Uber uniques, with a whopping 8% of the total population being in this kind of sweet spot that has 4 to 6, meaning that everybody that's in the 4 range cannot currently participate in the system because you need 5 of them. People who have 5 are able to go craft an Uber unique if they haven't dropped an Uber unique in those 5 that they don't need, or have somehow just rolled a ton of duplicates for one that they do need. And then people who have dropped 6 are now like right on the cusp of like potentially impacted by this. I've dropped 6 Uber uniques. Maybe I had 5 Melted Heart of Seligs and I got 1 Shaco and I've been desperate for a Starless Skies. Bada bing, bada boom, now I get to participate, right? So we're looking at roughly 8% of the population of the people who voted that fall into this category. When we're talking about the 7 to 9 range, we're now talking about people who have definitely done a lot of Duriel grinding. If you have 9 Uber uniques, you've done a couple hundred runs. You could probably assume that you have 2 or 3 of the ones that you want, and we'll kind of get into which ones do you even really want at all, and what are the chances that you even drop one of these bad boys for you. But you almost certainly have multiple ones that you do want, or you are the least lucky person on the planet, and you are now able to benefit from this change. So now we're looking at some percentage of this part of my population, and let's just say 100% of this. So 3% here, another 3% here, boom, we're up to 6% of the population. When we talk about people who have dropped 10 or more Uber uniques, we're talking about the real grinders out here, right? We're talking about back when duped mats were all the rage and everybody just had hundreds of them and you were perpetually running through with these one-shot bonk barbarians. You're doing hundreds of runs a day. You got 10 plus Uber uniques. And again, remember, it has about a 2% drop rate here. To get up to 10 plus, you've done 1,000 Duriels, or you're the luckiest person, or you're in the multiple of thousands. So you're somebody who's fully invested in playing this game a megaton. Let's say you literally have never won a single thing in your life, and you somehow have gotten all duplicates or all Uber uniques your class or build would literally never use. Congratulations, you just hit the jackpot. You get to participate with this system to its utmost. We are looking at 7% of the population there. So I argue, if 3% of the population definitely can, 7% of the population has 10 plus like Uber uniques under the belt and still needs this, boom, we're up to 10% of the population. And then some percentage of this small amount here, again, another 3%, 13% of the population of players get to participate in this system and get something out of it that is tangible and valuable to them, that is increasing their ability to enjoy playing this game or giving them reasons to continue to play this game. Because now they get to play the build that they always wanted to. They always wanted to make, Undying Barb and they never had a Melted Heart of Selig, or they need to finally fix their essence issues on Necro and they went and got themselves a Starless Skies. Great. Those people are now serviced. But I'd argue that the people who are most negatively impacted by the fact that Uber unique items are now allowed to be target farmed, are available in the game, and most people expect a perfect endgame build to be using at least one of them. If 82% of the population of players, as informed by my viewer base, are those people who do not get to participate with the system that's meant to make it easier for the non-mega blasters to finally be able to play the build that they want because they have the one item, we have a problem here. Now, how do you even really figure out how effective this is per population or per number of uber uniques that you dropped. We can look at some things, and none of my statistical analysis here is going to be perfect. I'm doing very strongly defined criteria, so I don't have to do all the statistical analysis because I'm not a stats dude. I just know how to kind of use Excel. So let's go ahead and look at some of my assumptions, and let's just kind of break down who gets uber uniques and who uses them. So just like the crux of everything that we're kind of talking about here, we have a couple of assumptions that I'm working with. One, that my viewer base is a little bit less casual than the average player base. And what I mean by that is I kind of don't make easily consumable materials or content on my channel. While I try to make them as open and available to as many people as possible, you have to be somebody who wants to listen to a dude with glasses rant while there's an Excel sheet behind him. And that just turns out that you're probably a little bit more invested in whatever video game you're talking about than the average person. So I do believe that the fact that we even have this much of a percentage of 10 plus uber uniques is representative of the fact that my viewer base is a little bit less casual than is the average. So that's definitely going to lend a bias to this. And I think it's actually even more dire for the average viewer base or the average player than what my data supports. Regardless of that, though, I think that your average casual player falls into the 0 to 3 category of uber uniques completely by random. I don't know if you followed the subreddit, but you will see 1,000 posts like this every single day. I just got my very first Duriel run done, and look what dropped. Here, they got a Shaco. The other posts that I checked up got a Starless Skies. Somebody got a Melted Heart of Selig, and everybody generally laughed at them. But what I'm trying to point to here is that most people playing this season have a fairly good shot at getting a single uber unique, which was something that a lot of players initially when this change came out kind of didn't believe. I got a lot of comments saying that nobody has these things. It doesn't matter what system they put in place, it's not going to affect anybody. And I don't think that that's really representative of the truth. If you look at anybody who has dropped at least one uber unique, we're looking at 44% of the population. Now, this is not to disprove the statements that those people were initially making. It's actually to strengthen their position. While it's not true that only 1% of the player base has these things, it's the fact that the vast majority of people who even do have one got literally nothing with these patch notes. Because if you're one of the casuals who just happens to have dropped one, maybe 2 uber uniques, you are not likely to have one that you want, and you don't get to do anything because you're not just going to fall into another 5 uber uniques for you to use for this system. Another assumption here, and I already touched on it, but since I have it written down here, is that if you're in the 4 to 6 range, that doesn't even necessarily mean that you get to participate. And that's going to be more important when we look at the numbers down below. But lastly, and that same assumption, which I already said, which is that you are only going to get 1 spark per uber unique. If you get 2 per uber unique, the numbers here look a lot different. If they have somehow multiplied the drop rate of uber uniques outside of Duriel by a factor of 10, even that might not be enough. By a factor of 100, 1,000, should I expect one to drop in a season in a Nightmare Dungeon? Maybe these numbers look a little bit different. Let's go ahead and identify what the uber uniques are, because there's 7 of them, and you may not have seen any of them because they're not all available for every class, which is actually a good thing, and we'll talk about it. But there's the Ring of Starless Skies, which can be used by any class, and I would argue every single class has a build that does use Starless Skies. The Grandfather is a 2-handed sword, which means only the Barbarian and the Necromancer can drop this item. Luckily, both the Barbarian and the Necromancer have builds which use it, although for the Necromancer, it's really only used on boss killer setups, whereas the Barbarian just equips it to one of its 18 item slots and just gets all of its stats for free. That's a whole other issue. We'll get to that later. Shaco, or the Harlequin Crest, can be dropped by everybody and can be used by everybody. Not every build wants a Shaco, but every class does. Ahavarian is a staff, which means it can only be equipped by the Druid and the Sorceress. In the Abattoir of Zir, Ahavarian saw a bunch of use because it was kind of cool to be able to get additional shrine effects, especially in the early days. And you could argue that there are builds which would use these on swap for certain things, but as far as I can tell, they are not the mainstay item on any real hyper meta builds that exist. Indariel's Visage can be used by every single class, and other than kind of on the Sorceress for Tal Rasha's Ring, it doesn't really see use. A ton of people try to use it all the time, but sadly it doesn't say +4 ranks to all skills or even stats that every single build wants. So sadly it still exists in obscurity, and it's one of those uber uniques that most people go, damn, I got 4 of these, why does RNGesus hate me? Doombringer can be equipped by the Rogue, the Barbarian, and the Necromancer. Every single Barb can use this, every single Rogue can also use this. And basically about 25% of the builds that the Necromancer has can and kind of wants to use this. And even in those scenarios, it's not really best in slot. It's kind of an option that you're making or a choice that you're making to slot it in. And then the Melted Heart of Selig, very famous in Season 2, now with the nerfs to it where it doesn't actually make you immortal anymore. People are still using this. It can be equipped on every single class. Not every single class is using it, and I think the vast majority of meta builds are not relying on this as a survivability tool, since one of the best things that had going for it in Season 2 was a vampiric power on top of that. So in general, can you use it? Yes. Are most people? No. What this means is that the Necromancer and the Barbarian have 6 total Uber Uniques that can drop for them, and the Rogue, the Druid, and the Sorceress each have 5 Uber Uniques which can drop for them. Now I made a pretty arbitrary calculation here, which is how many good Uber Uniques are there for each class. For the Necromancer, I argue that Starless Skies is a full point, Shaco is a full point, Grandfather is a half point, and Doombringer is a quarter point. Because again, only blood builds would use it, and even them aren't necessarily clambering to be able to equip it, other to see what like their highest maximum life can possibly be. For the Barbarian, you're in luck. You basically want to use every single Uber Unique, and you can equip them all and just not care about it. So they have 4.5 total Uber Uniques, which are good. The Rogue has 3 Uber Uniques, which are good. The Druid has 2.5, and the Sorceress has 3. So if you were to look at the potential, the chance that the Uber Unique that you drop is bad for your build, meaning you would not use it on your character, which is a good thing in this system because that means it's now fodder for you to go transmute the one that you want. 54% of the time for the Necromancer, you're dropping something you don't want to use. The Barbarian, only a quarter of the time, 40% for the Rogue, 50% for the Druid, 40% for the Sorceress. Remember, this is based off my own opinion. These numbers are not somehow set in stone, but you have an average chance, regardless of what class you're playing, to drop an Uber Unique you do not want about 40% of the time. What does this mean though? Well, first off, we have to figure out how long would it take for you farming Uber Uniques before you get to participate in this system. How many do you need to drop? Because we can't really calculate, we can calculate the chance, the average chance of you being able to see, like literally take the probability of it dropping and then run the statistics to be like, oh, okay, this percentage of the time you expect to have 6 Uber Uniques. We can do that. But how many in total do you need to drop before you get to transmute 1? So what this number right here, how many missing 1, means that you have every Uber Unique you could want, except for one of them. And you want to continue dropping Uber Uniques, whether it's a duplicate or one you don't want, until you can transmute it. Well, it's really simple. It's this number right here, plus 4. Why is it plus 4? Well, it should just be this number plus 5, but we're assuming that you do want to transmute 1, right? It's not that you already have the 3 that you want, and you also just kind of want to transmute for fun. You have to be missing 1 for this to benefit you. So for the Necromancer, you have to drop 7 Uber Uniques, 6.75, but obviously like that number doesn't exist, right? So you have to drop a total of 7 Uber Uniques. I argue for you to be able to have all of the Uber Uniques that you want, if you're incredibly lucky. And we're just going to assume you are for the purposes of this discussion. For the Barbarian, since you basically want to use all of them all together, you'd have to drop 9 of them to be able to fill in that last slot. Ooh, I finally got Melted Heart of Selig. Nice, I finally got my Doombringer. For the Rogue, 7. For the Druid, 6.5. And for the Sorceress, 7. Now let's talk about what percentage of the population of players that we assume are doing the Duriel grind that are being completely screwed, and this system is a saving grace for them. No drop protection. That's what a lot of people are calling this, right? It's this idea that the more that you do something, it increases the likelihood that you get a good outcome as opposed to the random outcome. This is something that you see in Hearthstone, which is after you open up a certain number of packs, you will get a legendary card. You may not want that legendary card, but at the end of the day, you can always go sack it for dust, meaning that you effectively have gotten the legendary card that you want after you sack a couple more because they don't give you 100% of your dust. That's a whole other game though. But the idea of no drop protection, what percentage of the time do you think somebody has dropped 5 Uber Uniques they do not want and then turned it into the one that they do want? 4.66% of the time this is going to happen for the Necromancers. You are going to drop 5 Uber Uniques you cannot use that you then turn into one that you do. For the Barbarian, a whopping 0.1% of the players. And again, that's just because Barbarian can equip every single one of these to some extent on some build if they want to. For the Rogue, a whopping 1.02% of the time this is going to happen. They're going to drop 5 Uber Uniques that are complete trash for them and go turn it into a Shaco. For the Druid, 3.13% of the time, and for the Sorceress, 1.2% of the time. That's pretty dire. We're talking about scenarios that almost statistically don't happen. Given enough time, given enough players, right? How many millions of players are there, etc. We're going to see these things be a benefit for some of them. But with the chances that you are getting screwed by the Uber Uniques that you're dropping, while fully invested in the Duriel grind, to the point where you get to transmute 5 into the one that you need, we're talking about, on average, 2% of the player base that is participating in that part of the system. None of the casuals. No casuals are doing this. No, we're talking about people doing hundreds of Duriel runs that are getting something out of this system. So that was a whole bunch of belly aching, and it's kind of dire. Why? Because I just don't agree with the number that they've assigned to this reward system. Let's talk about how many would make sense to me. I argue 3. Let's say 3 Uber Uniques. This means you only have to get unlucky 3 times in a row. It means you only have to find 1 and then get unlucky 3 times in a row, dropping a total of 4. 3 Uber Uniques is a place where the casual player base, and not even all of them, but the casual player base can choose to participate in this system. I don't know if you're a content creator. I don't know if you're knee deep in community management for the Diablo sphere. I don't know if you're just in ARPGs in general, but the vast majority of the questions that I get that relate to Uber Uniques is a person coming in who's just like this person right here, who said, I got lucky, I got my Uber Unique, how do I use it? It isn't, I got Melted Heart of Selig, I know that it is trash, as such, I've thrown it away. No. They dropped the Melted Heart of Selig and they want to use it. They need to know the best build that could possibly wield this thing. Why? Because they got an Uber Unique. They got an item that just a few months ago was stuff of myth and legend. And they go, damn it, this must be good, I want to put it on. Right now, those people are sitting there with their Melted Heart of Selig going, well, I guess I will leave this in my eternal stash forever until they change it again, or something is different in the game, or maybe itemization has changed. They have effectively dropped nothing at all. Even for builds that can use items, it isn't just as simple as equip the item and go. It's completely change your build. It's only usable on bosses. It requires you to change these aspects. You need to swap things out. This is not something that the casual player base can legitimately grok or has the resources to grok. And this is not me trying to talk down to casuals. Please, I'm a casual in the vast majority of things that I do. It's not a bad thing, but I think we're screwing them with this system. But let's call it 3. Let's say it's 3 Uber Uniques. Okay, cool. It's a 2% drop rate. We expect to get 1 every 50 runs, 65% of the time. Let's just say we're lucky. And that means I do 150 Duriel runs. Whether that's me farming the mats myself or somehow finding out that there's legitimate trade in Diablo 4 if you weren't aware of it. People are trading billions of gold at this point. But you could go trade for Duriel mats and then you can run them. Or hey, you get into a couple rotations over a week or 2 with other people in your community and you're playing them. Sick. You got 3. You got a Melted Heart of Selig, you got a Doombringer, and you got an Andy's Visage. All you want is that Shaco. If this was 3 to transmute, you get to go have a single Uber Unique that you want. After 150 Duriel runs, if you're incredibly lucky, what does 3 do for the other player base as well? Well, let's look at the 4 to 6 range. Remember how I said you really can't participate in this system? Because if you got 4, you can't do it. If you got 5, you probably have 1 that you want to use and somehow have 4 that you don't want to use. So you literally have gained nothing. But for the people who have 6, with 1 that they do want to use and 5 either duplicates or bad ones, making this 3 means that the person who only dropped 4 now has 2 Uber Uniques that they get to use. That's not even all of them. It's 2 out of 7 of the ones that they could possibly drop. But at least now they get to put on their Shaco and their Starless guys, or they get to have their cool Doombringer build with their cool Melted Heart of Selig and feel super tanky. The people who have 6, maybe they can finish out every build that they were hoping to play in that season. Or maybe they're playing on Eternal and now they get to finally finish those builds as well. I think for the people in the 7, 9, and the 10 plus range, it's the exact same thing. Will a few more people get caught in the net, meaning a few more people will benefit from it? Yes, absolutely, no question, right? There's got to be a universe where you have 9 Uber Uniques or 10 Uber Uniques, and yet somehow none of the ones that you want. So cool. The like mega elite, the people who are super farming Duriel every single season, who are already benefiting from this change, get to benefit a little bit more. Are they not deserving? Are they not worthy to have uber uniques? No, that's crazy, right? I've done 1,000 Duriels. I should probably have a Shaco at that point, as long as the, universe is a fair place. But it's the people in this range right here, the 90% of the player base that currently got nothing. And if it was down to 3, they get something. And it's not even as much as everybody else. They haven't somehow gotten something they don't deserve, but they get to participate. But I can tell you this, I don't want to farm Duriel anymore. I really don't. I don't like doing it. So here's my fix for Duriel, by the way, too, because it's not just like doom and gloom, get rid of it. Just like we can continuously respawn the seasonal construct out in the fields where you just click the little pedestal again and then spawn another instance of it, please let us do that for Duriel. Why do I need to leave dungeon, reset dungeon, run back into dungeon, re-click the pedestal after running through the entirety of the very small dungeon? Why? When Duriel dies, just respawn the pedestal and save me literal minutes and hours of my very limited mortal coil time, so that I'm not spent in loading screens, because nobody's just doing a couple Duriels and then running around. No, we're doing thousands of these things, and cutting out this like 2 to 3 minute part of the loop where all you're literally doing is sitting in loading screens would be phenomenal. I would really appreciate that. But also, let's just bump up the drop rates on Duriel as well. Make it so that it is legit target farmable in a reasonable amount of time. I'm not super interested in spending 10 plus hours literally killing a single monster in this game just to have the gear that I need to go do the end game content, to go participate in the gauntlet and legitimately be able to compete, because I'm not being restricted or gear gated by the items that I have. So let's bump up Duriel's drop chance too. Again, unless this is like a 10,000 times increase in the rates, I don't think that this is going to solve it. Let's bring this down to 3. Let's make Duriel drop them faster. Let me farm Duriel more efficiently without having to sit in loading screens. And then I think that this patch has legitimately done something to like really tangibly increase the quality of life of players currently in your season and who theoretically are going to come back for future seasons. That's my message to the developers. I hope that this breakdown, I hope that this data like goes a long way to at least be able to show people like, hey, first off, we do got Ubers, but not enough for this to be enough. And also, I'd love to hear from you. While I got a huge amount of people commenting, talking, etc. on this, I would love to hear about your experiences down below. Do you think that what I'm calling for is too drastic? Do you have different ideas? Do you have other ways that this could be improved so we can enjoy playing the video game more and the video game can just get out of our damn way? I'd love to hear from you. As always, if you're new here, go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you like what you're seeing. If you could also drop a like on it, I would super appreciate that. But that's enough of me shilling. Thank you so much for watching this video. I truly hope that it helps, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.